work in quite a range of media, don't you?
Yes, yeah.
Some quite conventional media and other much less conventional media. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I trained as a traditional easel painter. So in 1992, to my college mates, I said, I'll never use a computer to make art with. And well, look at me now. You know, it's come back to haunt me. And I kind of started to embrace the pixel when my condition sort of came back in, I think it was 2004, and I was in bed in a bit of a state on morphine, and one of my artist friends said, and I call this I had my Hagrid moment, and he said, Jason, you're an artist. What are you doing being a manager? Because I was a manager in education at that time. He said, you need to paint your way out of this. And how I can't paint, you know, I'm too ill, all that kind of stuff. I was quite grumpy and feeling sorry for myself. And he said, well, there's this new thing come out called an iPad. What's an iPad? No idea what one was. And on December the 27th, in 2010, I bought my first iPad. 3 months later, I was exhibiting in America, and I wasn't in Kansas anymore. I think my life had changed, but I was still thinking as an easel painter and sort of doing these quite traditional kind of setups. But then someone mentioned 3D printing. I thought, well, wow, you could print a painting, and as if by magic. See, is he appearing? Oh, blimey!
A bit of it.
That's it. That's it. I've
now
worked.
we got
Yeah.
it. Now we got it.
This is one of my first 3D prints, the Caliper Kid in all his glory, and you can see where the Beano fit. And I thought, blimey, right, you can do that. And then somebody said, well, if you've done that, Jason, what about a bit of augmented reality? So I was like a kid in a tea shop, a toy shop, or in a tea shop. I'm getting. That's where you were brought up. I quite liked drinking tea as a kid. So I was becoming really excited, and I worked out, well, it doesn't matter what I use to make art with. It only matters that the art has kind of a heart, you know, it has integrity and an authentic voice. And that was, so I became a digital artist, and I announced to the world, I told my wife, I said, I'm a digital artist now, you know, this is what I do. So I could embrace all these wonderful things and then start doing stuff like you do the drawing on the iPad and you send the design off, and then you get an inflatable sculpture, or like this in the background. This is a sculpture, because my hands are not great. I do all the designs and stuff and the 3D printing and all that business. Then it gets sent off to my mate, a very talented sculptor, Kevin, up in Leeds. The very famous tagline, Kevin up in Leeds, and he who also has built Yinka Shonobari sculptures. So he's got a tradition of working with disabled artists, and he builds them from it. And this at the moment is, in the background, is what's going to be unveiled next year. But you haven't seen a thing. You haven't
Yeah. So great.
So I've learned to become kind of evangelical about all this stuff that you can make art with. And whilst I've been in lockdown, it's gone even if it could go any further, I've gone past that. I've left that behind. The line was drawn in the sand, and I passed it about 20 miles ago. So I've started designing. I've been making films at home, and I'm designing a space that's going to be an interactive gallery that is bonkers, absolutely Billy bonkers. And you'll be able to walk around basically my head. Can you imagine that, how scary that is? Walk around my head in this, a portal will appear in your living room through the use of one of these, and you'll be able to step into my gallery, and there's going to be a performance space, a theatre space to show films, and a residency space as well. So initially it'd just be me using it, but the idea is that eventually it's going to be an artist Airbnb. So artists will be able to safely deliver residencies, and disabled artists will be able to deliver safely because I'm still effectively self-isolating. And when I went into self-isolation, I was so fearful of the future. And well, what can I do? How can I safely go out there and do my thing and work with these amazing people that I work with? So it kind of went through the fear process, and then there's nothing better for artists than fear of the future and not being able to do your job and not be able to work with the people that you love, and all that kind of thing. So I started working with Hot Knife, coming up with this crazy idea. And the Arts Council said, we think you're onto something, Jason, we want to support it. And, bless them, they have. So I've been designing this thing, which I can't wait to share because it's so exciting, as you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
from my restrained reaction to it.
No, I'm totally getting that. Just thinking before the lockdown, I think some of you who are joining us today will know that as part of our preparation for the I Am Festival, we partnered some schools with artists to do a little bit of exploratory work, which they would bring then into the Tate Exchange space. And Jason, you were partnered with two schools, the Garden in Hackney and also Woodfield in Brent. Could you just tell us briefly about how you approached working with a group of students who you had never met, had no idea what you were going to encounter, and your brief was, well, put on some kind of a wow entrance for people coming in on the first day of the festival? What went through your mind, and what did you do?
Well, I think because I'm a product of that education myself, I went to Pinderfields Hospital Special School for 5 years, from 11 to 16, that it's very natural, and it feels very natural for me to go in there. It feels like I would have loved to have had somebody like myself, who's obviously disabled and doing something successful. I mean, it could have been a plumber or anybody really, as long as I could see that there was a future. So that's my starting point really, and just being, I mean, it's obviously well planned out. So I decided to take one of my inflatables down, the rhubarb Totem, and we inflated him, and there was lots of woo. And I met a wonderful guy, another Jason, and he said to me, he said, I'm the real Jason, but you're the fictional Jason. And I thought, wow, this is quite a good start. I like that. And we worked with that. And then he did the Power Rangers Jesus, which was a good thing as well. But essentially it was what I always do when I go into a school where you're working with kids with additional needs, is to basically get the support workers on side. So I went in there really early, and we delivered a session with the support workers and taught them the skills using the iPad. So going armed with lots and lots of iPads, and the support workers at the garden school, and were absolutely amazing and on board. And we did all these wonderful things about expressing your it's about aspirations really, about who you are. So you've got them on board, and if you've got those guys on board, when you start the actual session itself, it's kind of straightforward, because you are spreading yourself pretty thin around all the kids. But if you've got support workers and teaching staff, etc., on side as well with what you're trying to do, it's much easier. And the theme of it was all about who do you want to be? Who is it you want to be? Who is it you want to be? And where do you want to be? And why? And that is a fantastic starting point to ask anybody, really. But I think I always think back to myself as a sort of 12, 13-year-old disabled kid. Nobody ever asked me what I wanted to be or do. And I always remember we had a psychological test, an IQ test, at the age of 13 to work out whether we could have an education or not. That's how, draconian things were. And I always remember the psychologist came out, and it came out that I was okay, and or whatever that means, And she said to the parents, "Oh, he could even get married." And my wife's been asking for a recount ever since. So
it's
that
extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
You could almost be written off.
Yeah,
on the basis of something so ridiculous.
I mean, yeah, and there were lots of really amazing bits, and the schools, the special schools, I mean, it's come on. They've come on so far. It's unbelievable. I mean, I always think, blimey, I wish I'd have been coming to somewhere like this. I mean, it was very much a kind of hospital setting, the one that I went to. So I'm a real sort of firm believer in that. You take the best stuff that you can take in. You deliver like a session that's kind of aspirational. So even if the children or young people or whoever it is you're working with, I always love being told they won't be able to do it. They won't be able to do it. I've worked with all ages up to 90 odd with Alzheimer's, and being told they won't be able to do it, and proving time and time again that they can. And all it is about being very patient and getting support workers, get the teachers on side, being spreading the session out so that it's not 15 minutes or half an hour. We have a full day on it, And
but that was what was amazing, Jason, wasn't it? And I remember some of the support workers were actually saying, a student will sit there for a couple of hours doing this, which, typically they might not be particularly focused or concentrated on something, but there was something about that really did engage them. And there was something else that you did, which was at Woodfield School, when you actually almost gave sort of mini tutorials to some of the students, like almost individual mentoring. What made you think that was a good approach?
Well, first of all, it was a pragmatic thing because I couldn't physically get round to them. That's how it started, and I am unbelievably self-critical about everything I do. I know you've got this public face where it's all wee, but I was very worried that I wasn't spending enough time with them. And at Woodfield, you had these kind of these guys that were really sort of articulate and interesting, and I thought, let's treat it as though we're doing a foundation course. Let's bring that kind of aesthetic to this setting. And you could see the pride on suddenly these guys that I was talking to got bigger because someone was actually saying, well, that wasn't their teacher or whatever, for whatever reason. It was somebody from the outside who does that job professionally, or was taking time to say, wow, tell me about this. What is, and I mean, the teaching staff, I must say, are amazing. They were, I kind of learned, and that's the other thing as well. If you're doing what I do, you've got to go in there and listen and watch and learn from the masters, really, people that are really good at what they do. And that includes in like community settings as well, where you're working with people, support staff in a different setting, but they know all the personalities. They can, and it's sort of working with them and giving them the skills as well. So you're not only giving tutorials to the people you're working with and treating it, you are artists. Today we're all artists.
Yeah.
This is a proper professional setting. I'm giving you a brief and you're going to do it, but I'm going to make you work for it, and I'm going to treat you with respect, and I'm going to make you laugh with terrible jokes and this kind of energy that I don't know. I'll tell you something though afterwards. People say, oh, I don't know how you keep your energy going. I said, well, you want to see me about 5 minutes after after the session, or when I come home to my wife, when I'm sort of just staring into space and exhausted. But it makes me feel really good, and it kind of what keeps me going is those memories of my own special education, and sort of being really passionate and wanting the best for these guys. Meeting I mean, when I went to Corby and started working in Corby, up to that point, this is sort of to sort of tell you how I got here. I was making art about myself. I was, you know, the angst, you know, ridden artist and all that kind of stuff. And then I met these guys, two communities, Teamwork Trust and Oakley Grange, and they changed my life. It was like a meteor coming down, a meteor of amazingness and love and friendship. And I just, that this guy who thought he knew what art was about and life was about, met people that absolutely knocked me for six. And I kind of just thought, I've got to do something with this. This has changed. This has absolutely changed everything about how I think about making art and how I deliver it. And yes, you can work. We took a group down to the Olympic Park because I was doing something there. People that were so severely disabled. Again, you can't do that. We did it. People that had not been out of Corby, and you know, parents running the length of the train platform, and bless them, Made in Corby were helping out to make sure all this happened. And it was a massive task, but it happened. And it was, even now, years later, I get asked when we're going back to London, Jason, because London is this place where we do things with Jason, and we got free ice cream and free cheese as well. So,
And I see something's come up on the chat. Sorry to interrupt you, Jason, but Victoria,
okay. I can have a drink.
Jason changed their and our lives forever at Teamwork Trust. That's from
bless.
Victoria there. So yeah, and I know they were going to come down to the Tate Exchange for the day you were going to be there on that opening day, along with another group from Hull, I believe.
Yes, kids at Hull, yeah.
Yeah, and you were making that whole event so inclusive, not just for our network, but also so that we could build our contacts and our communities. So,
well,
Jason,
really cool.
I'm looking at the time, and I know that people will have questions, but I know that you've also got some lovely images of some of your work. Yes. I noticed you've already spoken about Jason. Jason, I think, is one of the themes of your work that you might want to talk to us about. But this might be the point where you just show us a little taster of some of the things before we move on to our other participants' questions.
Has that come up okay?
Absolutely has, yeah.
Brilliant, excellent. So, just going to... So here he is. This is the totem, the design that I did. And if you notice, there's something really important. On the sleeves, all the way around, everywhere, there's the names of those that I worked with throughout this project. And the reason for this is there was a young woman called Claire that I worked with, called Teamwork Trust in Corby, and I once included her name in an augmented reality experience, and it was a really powerful experience for her because someone kind of that was outside her kind of normal life, I suppose, acknowledged who she was just simply by having a name. So I've never forgotten that. So I thought it was really important that we included that aspect. So, and the heart as well at the centre, because everything I do, there's sometimes the stuff in my work is very literal. There's not much poetry about it. There's a heart to the work. So he went on, that design then went on to be created into this what looks like a very big inflatable, which is, so I've been inflating him in my garden and entertaining my neighbours and German TV and Lord knows who. But so he's about 10 foot, but there is another one, his bigger brother, that's 25 foot high. So there's and you can see he goes to the second floor window of our house. So yeah, and he lights up as well. So on a night, yeah, that's what it looks like. And he's but he's the project was called Jason and the Argonauts because I'm obviously named after Jason. And the Argonauts, Jason went round Greece looking for heroes to travel on the Argonauts. So the idea was I was going to go around the UK looking for people that I would work with, and they'd share their stories with me, and it really worked out. And we ended up making some beautiful work. And I've been doing some crazy things, like whilst I've been in isolation, like scanning my head, which has been a lot of fun to create an avatar for something that I'm working on. And this is going to be the funny avatar so I'm going to be flying around this virtual world, but I'm just giving you little sneaky peeks about what I'm doing, but I'm very excited about it. This is for a game that I'm working on. That's the guys that I've been working with are providing the voices. So we've got a game about what it is to be disabled, and you have to, in order to win it, you have to lose. Because if you win it, you're deemed to be not disabled enough. And each player will have one of these wonderful cars that's going to be kind of psychedelic. And think John Lennon's Rolls Royce, but it's on a mobility vehicle from the 1970s. And it's very influenced by wacky races as well. And there's the heart again. And that's for something that Hot Knife Digital Media, we've been working on creating an augmented reality thing, which again, I'm giving you a little sneaky peek at. It's to do with the Folkestone thing. Because, before lockdown, I was very lucky to win the Adam Reynolds Award with the wonderful, wonderful people at Shape Arts. And it was the biggest honour as an artist, you know. To me, it's better than the Turner Prize because it's to do with it's kind of represents my kind of affection and all the stuff that goes with working with Shape right from the beginning when I was an artist just starting out. So it's really cool. But yeah, this is a sneaky peek of something I'm doing for the Folkestone Triennial. This is Billy, Berry Boy Billy, a 3D print. So I wanted to show you the process. I've got it the wrong way around, but you didn't notice that. The drawing first, then the 3D print, and then the actual sculpture that, because my hands are not great, I get made by Kevin from Leeds, that famous tagline, who also makes Yinka Shonabari's work. So we do all this work together, and he builds these beautiful sculptures for me, bless him, exactly to my design, which is really difficult when you see the level of detail. And this is the Hull Totem. I worked with the disabled communities of Hull, and was very influenced by the really tough nature, tough, beautiful women in Hull. And they even had the headscarf revolutionaries, they were called. They changed the law about fishing rights and all kinds of stuff. So I made a piece of sculpture that represented disability. So it's got disability at the core of it. And again, that famous comment about what is your work about, Jason? It's the Beano meets I, Daniel Blake. And you get stuff like that right in the middle of it. So yeah, that's just a little sneaky peek of what I do, what I'm going to do, and but it's all inspired by all the decoration on the surface. Everything I do, it's about things that have been said to me or stories that have been shared to me by the people I've been working with, and through teaching them the skills, they create work which I then work with to develop things like this, which is like a community voice. And there was, in fact, each sculpture has an augmented reality which represented all the facets of the lad that said, I want to be a rugby player, I want to be a footballer, I want to be a dancer, I want to be a postman. Because if I'm a postman, then that means I'm like everybody else. I can do a job when I leave school, just like everybody else. So we had the augmented reality of him posting a letter in a letterbox, dressed in all the, and that for me was the most powerful thing, one of the most powerful things and emotional things for me, that because it was really pure what he was saying. He was saying, I just want to be like everybody else, you know, and yeah, good stuff.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think we're quite privileged. We have to keep it to ourselves, won't we? Some of this secret stuff. I think this would be a great time actually to open up to our other participants today and see who's brought along a question. Chloe is very kindly being our moderator and finding out who's got questions for you, Jason.
While we wait for the questions to come in, we do have that one that I think was it Victoria submitted. Lynne, you've got it.
I do have it. Forgive me. It's a lovely long question, but Jason has actually already seen it. But for everybody else's benefit, I will read it out. So, how and for whom do you record the ongoing impact of your work for the SEND communities? It's about recording the impact, but a little bit of context. As an example, because of working with you, our service users' engagement with art continues to grow in so many ways. But the lockdown showed the work you did using tablets meant that the groups who worked with you were so much more willing to participate in Zoom sessions, etc., as they have no fear of the tablets or getting it wrong, because your art has made this something that they've mastered. And their art has been shown in local galleries, and they are phenomenally proud that their art is part of your art. So, I mean, something to respond to there around sort of use of tablets and technology, which obviously is something that you really have facilitated and made people feel very confident, but also that impact and how you might record that. So sort of several parts to that question, Jason.
Well, thank you, Victoria. Sunday name, Vicky. I know you. The great thing. Sorry, I'm just adjusting myself. My legs went to sleep. I think the starting point from that is everything's planned so that I know, and I knew beforehand. I'd heard, I was very nervous about working with adults with learning disability. Working in Corby was the first time that I think it was over the course of the year. And I was so nervous, I'll be absolutely honest, because just because you're disabled, there's like this understanding that you understand all disabilities, and you're a kind of soothsayer and truth speaker for all disabilities. And I was learning so fast. But I had a year to kind of learn. I was changing things on a daily basis because I was doing 2 or 3 days a week initially. And it was like, this isn't working, I'm going to do that. So I was putting lots of planning in place, but having the ability to reflect and change, adapt, you know, and that's when I started working out that support workers were really vital to get their support. I'd had some experiences, not in Corby, by the way, but in a school that I worked in a long time ago, where the support workers didn't like the subject, which then passed on to the kids I was working with at that time. So, because they were frightened of these iPads. It's amazing how people can get frightened of technology, but it exists, you know, and it's usually the people that probably shouldn't get frightened, you know, ironically, you know, and yeah. I do it, you know, it's not working. Why, you know? So it was about sort of persevering, and then really asking for advice as well, and getting feedback straight away. What did you think of that? How could I? And asking the support workers as well, or the teaching staff, how could I improve that? What do you think? And I used to write sort of after the sessions, write up a little sort of reflection on each one with kind of clear actions and how I could improve. Because, like I said, it was I'm very kind of self-critical, but I think that's quite a good thing, because that's the only way that you can improve. So I looked at what worked. I looked at how I could improve, be doing like simple things like doing a recap, simple thing like that, and not assuming that everything had been retained. So you do the same recap every week, and at the end of the session you talk about, you know, what we've done and what we've learned. And it was amazing. It started to go in. I had people that wouldn't sit at a table, suddenly started to sit at the table because I was talking about my life, and then they started telling me about theirs. And you know what? We became friends. And the evaluation process was, most of the projects were funded by the Arts Council, so there's a very formal way of recording that and feeding up the information. I was getting people through the Arts Award as well, so there was a way of looking at that. But the best kind of evaluation for me personally was asking the staff, can you give me some feedback? And, you know, I mean, I was a trained teacher and all of that, but I was really sort of starting at the beginning again. And I knew my gut feeling when I first started working with the disabled community and people that I was told would not be able to do it, was that they would, and they could, and they would flourish. And something magical happens in these workshops, and it's about them sharing themselves with me and me sharing myself with them, and talk about the artwork, talking about their lives. What's important in your life? Who do you want to be? Where do you want to be? Those really kind of, well, I suppose, kind of existential things that we've always asked of ourselves. Who is it? Who are we? But if you're a disabled person, people are always telling us what we can't do. And through these art sessions, all that goes out the window. So if you want to fly, we make that happen. If you want to drive the Night Rider, which has happened, if you want to drive the Night Rider with David Hasselhoff, we can make that happen. If you want to perform with Oasis, and because you've told me that your brother is Noel Gallagher, why not? You know? And then all these kind of beautiful, kind of surreal stories, and then they're not, that they are so kind of serious and real, and they can see it on paper, they can see, or on the screen, they can see it, and that is really powerful. That is such a powerful thing. That, and you know, it's been very common that people, I've got the feedback, I never realised that. They've never mentioned that before. You know, talking to Stephen at Teamwork about choo-choos, because he loves trains, you know, and that's the most exciting, beautiful thing. That, and we made him a driver of a train using digital art. And, you know, it seems like such a small thing, but it's powerful stuff. And it's the same thing that I'm doing in my art, you know, pretending to be other people. I escaped my disability as a kid by pretending to be other people in drawings and imagining a life that I wasn't having. And, you know, I was told I wouldn't make it 16. Here I am at 51, yeah, you know, with a wife and 2 kids. And I'm sure, I'm sort of positive that art has kept me going and resilient. And yeah, and that's why I'm really evangelical about going in and working with the people that, well, the people that I've sort of grown to love, really. And I don't use that word lightly. I do. I think the world of them, and you know, it's I'm full of admiration for the hard work. I'm full of admiration for the schools, the special schools that, blimey, I wish I'd have gone to. You know, as a kid, mine was very different. You turned up at 9:30, 10:15, and the TV went on till 2:30. You know,
so yeah,
it's it's, you know, being able to do, so that's why I do the things like the, you know, the tutorial stuff, and let's give them the best experience ever. This is important. This is really, really good stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I've gone all over the place a bit there, but
No, I don't think you have, and I
it's
think it's
expansive.
certainly borne out by what I witnessed watching you. You know, and you're not just giving out; you're also listening, and you're also really responding to each individual and what they want without any kind of judgment, and giving that time. I think was the most important thing. These things, you know, I suppose if you're not used to working in that kind of environment, you kind of want to just keep moving things on, and you want to see immediate responses, and you want to get that feedback for yourself to know that you're doing the right thing. And you might end up talking too much, and whereas actually everyone will tell you, no, just a bit less language, give a bit more time. Yeah. Everyone needs a bit more time to process things, and I think everything that you said really bears that out. So that's great. Chloe, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have one more. What is your first memory of being exposed to art, and your first memory of wanting to create art?
Ooh, that's a good one. I've got a very specific one that I might have mentioned actually, but every year I grew up in Wakefield, which is in West Yorkshire, and it's but for a family that didn't have much, but it was a magical time for me. So every year we used to go to a place called Withernsea, which is a really small coastal town on the east coast, and I remember going into the arcade and seeing a carousel that had hand painted. It was a really old one because it had the first Doctor, William Hartnell, Doctor Who, and it had Daleks painted and Thunderbirds. And at a really young age, I worked out that someone had painted it with themselves. And if someone painted it, they painted the things that they liked to look like the things that they liked. So there must be a job to do that, and that you could get paid to do stuff that you really liked. And there was things like reading the Beano and see Alice in Wonderland and seeing the illustrations. I remember looking at them as a kid and thinking, this. It's like a peek into this. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know it was kind of, there was a word for surrealism or, you know, whatever. It's akin to hearing Strawberry Fields Forever for the first time and realizing that there's another world. There's another world that you can talk about and be part of as an artist. And when I became disabled as a kid, because I had no movement I was paralyzed from the neck down and could only move my face really, and it was really important to me to kind of, I mean, I've never really told anybody this, but it's the mask thing that comes in my work. All my figures wear a mask, and my mum used to, because I could only feel my face, my mum used to decorate my face, and all that kind of stuff is very personal and I mean, and beautiful and joyful, I think. And so I'm fingers crossed. This is another spoiler, but fingers crossed. I'm working on a project that's on the theme of love with Tate in the new year. All being well, and can't say too much about it because it's very early days. But Shape, who I'm working with on, you know, trying to make this happen, said, what's the connection between your work and love? And I said, well, I think all my work is about love, really, either through the communities that I engage with or the fact that, you know, 95% the content of my artwork is kind of connected to childhood and that the popular culture stuff, and, you know, these like, on my, like I've got a prop to hand. Like this is the Caliper Kid, and he's one of my first 3D prints, and, you know, he's got a lot to do with like the Beano and Corky the cat, and I think those first kind of experiences you have with art stick with you, and it's almost like they go through whatever you do throughout your life as an artist. So I'm constantly sort of celebrating popular culture, my upbringing in Yorkshire, the politics as well, because my art is about sort of the hand in the velvet glove. It's Trojan horse art, you know. On the Jason the Argonauts, he's got a tattoo on his neck saying, I'm a Trojan sheep. And that means people look at it and go, oh, that's funny. It's got colourful and it's got lots of nice patterns. And I've got them then, you see, because I've sort of conned them into thinking that the art's just kind of colour and humour, when really it's about, I can talk about all this other stuff that's to do with, you know, the disability rights movements. And I can only, as an artist, you make art that's authentic. And the best way that I can combat the way that I feel that disabled people are being treated at the moment is by making daft art. And it all goes back to childhood and mum and dad saying, you know, I was the first one to go to university, and because they believed that it was Jason's an artist. They were saying that when I was like 9 years old, you know. And it was that belief that you could. I mean, I got told at school, Wakefield, 1976, Wilshire, because they called you Wilshire, they didn't call you by your first name. What do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I'd like to play for Wakefield Trinity. That never happened. Or I want to be an artist. And I was told that you could never be an artist because, you know, people like me didn't become artists. And, well, I showed them.
It sticks, though, doesn't it? It's amazing how it sticks.
Yeah,
but also amazing how sometimes that can be the one spur that you need to say, no, sorry, you're just wrong. Something's come up in our chat here. I'm just looking to see. Something nice from Caroline Pryor, for someone so nervous, Jason put everyone at ease from day one at Teamwork. So that's from Caroline Pryor. Obviously from Teamwork. So
thank you, Caroline.
Nice as well to see. Do we have any more questions, Chloe?
Oh, we've got one person who's raised their hand, so I will allow them to talk.
Hi, Jason, really enjoyed your talk and your work there. Really, I think it probably answered all the questions I had there. It's got a real warmth about it, and I guess that's how it kind of brought out the work from the participants of the workshops. But I would be kind of curious to know maybe what were the outcomes of the work in schools, and were you a translator of the participants' work? And maybe just talk some more around that. And maybe another question is just how your disability comes out as a kind of superpower. Maybe could you talk around some of that? And I'm sure you know Jess Tom, the Tourette hero. I'd love to see you maybe in a sort of, you know, a world, you know, British tour of superpower artists, really. And so there's a couple of things I'm interested in sort of getting a little discussion around a couple of things there.
Well, with the work in schools, what was really cool is it became an extension of the Argonauts project that I was doing. So basically, it was about, I went in with, right, we're gonna each of these guys is gonna make a piece of art. That's your first thing. They're gonna make a piece of art using the technology or parts of the technology that I use. So within those 2 days, one of the major outcomes is that they're going to be using an iPad and they're going to be using a professional app to create art with. Everybody succeeded in that. The next part of that was, well, we got this fantastic event that was going to happen. How are we going to represent that work? And we created a banner, and each of them was going to have their artwork ironed on using one of these transfer things onto either T-shirts, because it's become a very powerful motif. That idea of becoming your totem, becoming your superpower, becoming your superhero, because there's a whole thing at the moment about people that like Paralympians. I get constantly asked, well, you know, have you ever been interested? And I said, well, look at me, you know. What do you mean? You need to ask. You need to ask why I'm not part of that. But there's a whole notion, this interest about, you know, that disabled people through technology have been able to excel themselves, like, you know, through blades on their legs. They can run faster than an able-bodied person, and actually compete in the main Olympics. There's all this kind of stuff going on. But I'm more interested in the thing in our subconscious, that kind of creative stuff, where you get a guy who doesn't speak, doesn't communicate, and is suddenly kind of talking about this stuff that's here, that's kind of important to them and they're passionate about, and then it feeds into other parts of their lives. And I know that works for a fact, because I started working with a guy called Anthony, and anybody who knows me will know that I talk about Anthony a lot, because he's an incredible chap. And when I first met him, he wouldn't sit down. He walked off while you were talking to him. He wouldn't engage with what you're doing. And 5 years later, he came to my unveiling at Hull, University of Hull, travelled 100 miles with his family. He sends me videos about what he's doing. He went to a concert with his family to see Noel Gallagher. Now, to me, that is the most amazing outcome. And it's not because of me, it's because of friendships and because of what that team are doing with him, and things that came out of the workshops. It had a knock-on effect that has been beautiful. And yeah, and as you can tell when I'm talking about it, it's so important to me. And I want to see, I got interviewed last week by German TV, and the lady who was interviewing said, "What would you do if you were given the fourth plinth, Jason?" And I said, "Well, I'd plonk some art on it that represented disability, and, you know, made people think." And because I want these, we're in a moment in history where everybody's questioning public art and statues, and I think one of the questions that should be asked is, why aren't there more depictions and representations of disability out there? You know, we've got loads of dead geezers. You know, I want to see you know, the other stuff as well. I want to see disabled people. I was brought up with old charity boxes, you know, with the thing in the forehead where you know, where you put the 50p piece in. Old Damien Hirst thought he was doing some good for the disabled community by doing his charity piece of art, but it was the most tone-deaf piece of art that I've ever seen, because it had no authentic voice. It didn't talk to disability. It didn't talk about. It just made a kind of general statement that's, you know, like a headline, and it's very slick, and it's 20 or 30 foot high. Yeah, and so yeah, so I think I like the idea of tours of this stuff. I think we need to take this stuff on the road, and that was the idea before lockdown, that the inflatable sculptures were going down to the Tate, and we're working on making that happen again. But I think another important point is as well that I said this to Lynne, I think we were off air when I said it, but I think my main sort of focus about working with this community is don't say goodbye. Because when I was at special school, we had loads of like art groups and stuff, and you'd be like really inspired, then you never saw them again. So what I've tried to do is have a real relationship with when I went into schools, I make, you know, a commitment to them. So we're already looking at ways that we can carry on the work, and looking at networks, and because I want my sculptures long term, this is the goal, to speak to one another and be a force for good within the disabled community, so that they are totems. They truly work as totems and as powerful forces to kind of challenge and change.
Thank you, Jason. I mean, I think it's also true. I mean, when you're thinking about superpowers, yes, there's flying and doing all the kind of spectacular stuff. But I think your story about the person wanting to be a postman is also really quite telling, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not for us to
That's the
say what is a
superpower.
superpower.
Yeah.
You know, it's what you want to be that currently you can't be. It can be anything you want, and I think it's that authentic voice is actually the most important thing. I'm really gutted. We're coming up to our hour being over. So thank you very much for the questions. Everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to signpost a few things that also are up currently on our website that Jason has offered us. One is an opportunity to design your own Argonaut. So you might want to try this yourself, or if you have a group of students that you think would be interested, there's a really lovely resource that Jason's made for us. And you may well have an opportunity to get one of your Argonauts into Jason's game that he's devising. Jason, you've also shared with us a really lovely film of some other aspects of your work. There's a nice blog and, of course, links to your website, which will show even more of the fantastic work. I know you're becoming an international celebrity. We may never be able to track you down again.
Never.
A great big thanks to you for spending an hour with us this afternoon. I feel really privileged.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Company. And let's hope that in the coming year, because of course the theme will be love for the Tate Exchange in this year to come, that our paths will cross again. And there's some great things coming up on the chat. Thank you, that was great, well done, and so on and so forth. Thanks everyone for joining us, and stay safe.
Thank you.